Hey, sports history fans, this is Ariel Gonzalez from Wrestling with Heels On. Hey, when you go to a sporting event, you don't go there to be meek and mild, unless you live in Japan. You go there to get freaking wild. That means bringing some attitude to your amplitude. How do you do that? You get Racket. R-A-K-I-T. Racket combines a compact 7-inch megaphone, 8 powerful adjustable LED lights, noisemakers, an insert you design, and it's all fully customizable to match your team's colors. Now, here's the coolest thing about this product. J.J. Abraham, the founder, was the ultimate cheer dad. He followed his daughter's cheer group around the country, and he saw parents struggling using all sorts of crazy contraptions to make some noise for their kids. And then he had an aha moment. He thought, wait, why not combine all of these doodads into an all-in-one compact device for the ultimate fan? JJ and his team worked 3 years on developing version after version after version until they finally landed on Racket, R-A-K-I-T, so you can make some noise and cheer and be a part of the action. So get out there and let's get loud. Bring a racket to your next game or competition to cheer on your favorite team or athlete. You can customize your racket with your own logos, drawings, and names. Get beads to match your team's colors. Flashing lights add to the excitement. Are you ready to make a racket? Be part of the game. Each racket pack comes with 1 racket megaphone, 1 lanyard to keep a hold of the thing, 2 scratch-resistant bead packs, 1 clear and 1 color of your choice, and a 10-pack of customizable self-adhesive inserts. Currently on sale, wait for it, $24.99. To pick up your racket today, head to myracket.com. That's myraket.com. Now get out there and make some noise.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
The Rose Bowl. The game that inspired the college football bowl season has a long and storied history. The stadium itself is 100 years old, and in celebration of it, Pigskin Dispatch is assembling some of the top historians and authors to share the memories, people, and events that make the granddaddy of them all the special game that it is. Enjoy this Rose Bowl memory from pigskindispatch.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And we are in Rose Bowl month, having a great time learning about all these great Rose Bowl games with so many great historians and authors coming on and talking about the granddaddy of them all. And we have another doozy tonight as we go chronologically through these games. We're going to be talking about the 1984 Rose Bowl, and we've got a special guest, one of our great friends, Joe Ziemba from When Football Was Football podcast here on Sports History Network. Joe, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Oh, Darren, thanks so much for having me. And as I said before, I love the concept of what you're doing. And for me, it is so much fun. And I'm looking forward to talking about this game because what I try and do is find something intriguing or unusual in every game, and something always pops up. So this one, I don't think will be any different. We're going to talk about a quarterback who couldn't sleep before the game because he had food poisoning. We had a scoreboard that was hijacked and the wrong teams were listed on the scoreboard, and one of the biggest upsets in Rose Bowl history.
Wow, that is definitely a great teaser, Joe. I can't wait to hear about these. And you're right, there are so many great things and odd things that happen at these Rose Bowl games as we've been learning. It seems like every year there's something that's unique or a record set or really some outstanding play by a player, and it makes them memorable. And that's what makes them so much fun. So we're glad you could join us and talk about this 84 game.
Great. And this was a kind of a fun one, not so much for those of us from the state of Illinois, but it was a fun one.
Well, the rest of us from the rest of the country that have no rooting interest, we love those kind of games. So.
Right. Yeah, well, our two combatants that year in the 84 Rose Bowl were UCLA, representing the Pac-10 with a 6-4-1 record, versus the number 4 team in the nation, the Fighting Illini of Illinois, with 10-1 record. And was played on January 2nd of 1984 because, much like this year, New Year's Day fell on a Sunday, so they moved it back a day. And unfortunately for Illinois, and I'm going to give the score first before we talk about the game, UCLA, with that woeful 4-loss and 1-tie season, simply devastated Illinois 45-9 in a game that really wasn't that close. So when you win by 36 and it's not close, that's kind of ugly. And for UCLA, the team that won, they started out the season really poorly. They lost 3 and tied 1 in their first 4 games. So you can't really conceive of a team that's 0-3-1 going on to win a major tough conference and then winning the Rose Bowl. But that's exactly what they did. They won 7 of the last 8 to win the Pac-10 conference. Had a couple of stars on the team that you might know the names. One was Rick Neuheisel, who now became a coach, of course. He was a quarterback, passed for over 2,200 yards, and Kevin Nelson, the running back, with 898 rushing yards for the team. And one of the players who was drafted in 1984 but wasn't in this game was a quarterback named Jay Schroeder, who played 11 years in the NFL. Only got 1 start for UCLA as a freshman, and that was 3 years before this Rose Bowl season. And he gave up football, though, and he played baseball in the Toronto Blue Jays minor league system for 3 years. And then he started working out again when things weren't going well with his baseball career and thought, maybe I'll try the NFL draft. Well, people saw him. He's a big 6'4" quarterback. He got drafted like 83rd in the overall draft and went on to have an 11-year NFL career. And he was the quarterback, and you may remember this, when Joe Theismann broke his leg. I think it was on Monday Night Football. And Jay was the guy who came in, promised Theismann they'd win the game for him, and that was really his first extensive playing. He was able to play for the Redskins after that, and as I said, enjoyed a great career. But in college, in the pros that is, he threw a game-winning touchdown during his freshman or sophomore year, in 1980 in a 20-17 win over Southern Cal, and that was kind of what put him on the map, even though he didn't play a whole lot of football during what would have been his collegiate career. But he's always been remembered that. And that game that he played against Southern Cal way back in 1980, a pass was thrown that was deflected by a defender, was picked up by the UCLA guy who ran it in. And so with 2 minutes remaining, UCLA was able to defeat Southern Cal. And again, Jay Schroeder dropped back and threw that pass, and his largest playing time, I think, of his collegiate career. So here he was. We have an NFL quarterback. He did make a Pro Bowl 1 year that would have been on the UCLA team, but gave it up to become a baseball player. So I thought that was kind of unique and one of those interesting things, which has nothing to do with the Rose Bowl, though, Darren, but we thought we'd throw it in anyway.
Yeah, well, you cover a lot of bases there, especially with the NFL career. And you talked a little bit about Joe Theismann. Of course, they were playing the Giants, and I think it was Lawrence Taylor that ended up doing the hit on him that took Theismann out. And can you imagine being Schrader saying you're going to come into that game after you just see that, Giants defense that was just ferocious, especially with LT. Everybody was afraid of him. He's unblockable, and he just broke the guy that plays ahead of his leg and ended his career. And yeah, I'm going in there to face that. So.
Yeah, and especially not really having played much the last 4 or 5 years. But at the time, Schrader, he did say that his baseball career actually helped him, that he was able to step in. He said, I think my baseball background helped me in that game, as he recalled going in for Theismann. In a baseball game, you spend a lot of time sitting around just like a backup quarterback, which is true. But then you got to get up and do something. And so I was ready to take over, he said, which I thought was really a kind of a nice stretch when you compare football to baseball from players who maybe are watching the game instead of actually participating back then.
Interesting. I never heard that quote before. That's a good one.
And then Illinois, who broke our hearts that year, 10-1 record, 7-0 in the Big Ten. And a great quarterback in Jack Trudeau, threw for 2,446 yards. Running back Thomas Rooks picked up 842 yards on the ground. And then they had a great defensive end named Dan Thorpe. He was actually the MVP of the team, the MVP of the Big Ten. And he later enjoyed a kind of a brief pro career, played for 3 teams, the Saints, the Colts, and the Chiefs over 4 or 5 years. So they had an opening game loss themselves. They lost to Missouri 28-18, and then really kind of bounced back and really only had one difficult game. That was a 17-13 win over Ohio State, perennial tough team, of course, in the Big Ten. And then the Illinois marched all the way to the Rose Bowl. So when they got there, of course, they were going to face Rick Neuheisel. Am I pronouncing that correct?
I think Neuheisel's the way I've always learned it. So,
but it was setting up some interesting trivia for that game. For example, I mentioned Don Thorpe for the Illini, setting up a tackle, and he was paired with another tackle called Mark Butkus. And sure enough, that was the nephew of the great Dick Butkus of the Chicago Bears, who also played at Illinois. And Illinois was also, under Coach Mike White, recruiting a lot of players from California. And so they proudly claimed that 21 of their 95 players who played in the Rose Bowl that year were from California. And they were clearly the favorite in the game. Trudeau had a great passing rating of 140.8 for the season. I think he was in the top 3 in the nation, completed 64% of his passes. And on the opposite side would be Neuheisel, who actually at the time set a NCAA single game mark by completing 25 of 27 passes in a win over Washington. And his percentage was 69% for the year. And we look back almost 40 years ago, those are pretty good darn percentages for passing game, which was becoming more sophisticated, maybe not like it is now. And the team also, UCLA, had an All-American safety named Don Rogers. So both teams were known for having strong finishes to games. Illinois scored 90 points throughout the year in the fourth quarter, UCLA 105, but Illinois went into the game as a 4-point favor. Then on game day, it was 84 degrees, a little warmer than it would have been in Illinois at the time. And although UCLA was playing the game in their home stadium, the Rose Bowl, they were decided to be the visiting team, so they had to dress accordingly. And that's where our food poisoning story comes in, Darren. Several players on UCLA suffered from food poisoning the night before, including Neuheisel. And he said, I woke up at 4 a.m. and I was sweaty and queasy. I thought maybe I was nervous, but I don't usually get nervous. And then I threw up about 4 times. I was real weak before the game, and I didn't know if I'd be able to go. But in a game like this, you have to go for it. So Coach Donahue of UCLA didn't want to freak out the other players in the team, thinking their quarterback was too sick to play. Put their quarterback in a car instead of the team bus and had him go to the Rose Bowl. And hopefully they would pump something into him, make him feel better by game time. So he was able to play. When game time started, Neuheisel was all over the place. 43 seconds into the game, Don Rogers, who we mentioned, intercepted a Jack Trudeau pass. And although UCLA did not score on that, Neuheisel had a great game with 4 touchdown passes. They were up 7-3 after one quarter, 28-3 at the half, 38-3 after 3 quarters. And Illinois finally scored a touchdown in the fourth quarter when Trudeau passed to Thomas Rooks. They missed the extra point, and it ended up 45-9. It was the second straight Rose Bowl win for UCLA after all. But the offense of UCLA was dominant, 511 yards. Illinois could only come up with 205. And Darren, one of the interesting facts about that game, that on 17 rushing attempts, Illinois came up with exactly 0 yards on the ground during the game.
Wow.
And Trudeau tied a Rose Bowl record with 3 interceptions. And ironically, the next season in 85, He won 215 passing attempts without an interception. But on the big stage, he had a tough day. And this was the first time in bowl history that an unranked team, being UCLA, was able to beat a top 5 team in a bowl game. But I also mentioned a scoreboard prank, which was kind of interesting when we consider the source. There were a couple of students from Caltech. And of course, I would never qualify to go to Caltech or even to be allowed on their campus. Even at the time, they were messing around with computers and managed to sneak into the scoreboard area and set up a computer, which allowed them to remotely post messages on the scoreboard. And sure enough, shortly after they got started with that, instead of Illinois and UCLA on the scoreboard, it said Caltech and MIT were the teams that were playing. And so one of the students who did this apparently told his professor beforehand that he was going to do it, and ended up getting extra credit for pulling this off and got an A for the semester in his course.
But those guys from Caltech, because they're the ones that did the halftime prank at 1961's game, where they changed the Washington Huskies cheerleaders' cards that they had out in the crowd around. It was supposed to spell out Huskies in the home crowd, and NBC was televising it. And here it spelled out Caltech. They had a whole big, and it was successful. Those guys from Caltech, they're smart, and they're also pranksters at the Rose Bowl, it sounds like.
Oh, man. That's funny. Well, they got away with it again, and now they're using technology to do it.
Wow, that's a good one. I didn't hear that Caltech story.
Yeah.
Very good.
So Illinois got beat, and I guess some of the UCLA players were a little upset because when Illinois came in and trumpeted that they had all these California players and they were ranked and didn't take UCLA very seriously, and UCLA safety Don Rogers said they took over everything and we lost a lot of respect in Los Angeles. People said we couldn't play with them and that we shouldn't be here. Everything in Los Angeles was pro-Illinois before the game. And then even Neuheisel was talking about the game, and he said, you have to wonder who wrote this story for us. Whoever it was, I want to thank them very much. And here it was, the unheralded UCLA team pulling one of the biggest, if not the biggest, upsets in bowl game history. And so that was some of the gems we've been able to pull up from almost 40 years ago from a game, as I said, in Illinois, we'd kind of like to forget.
Yeah. Well, the Neuheisel story is very interesting with him having that food poisoning. That's almost, very Michael Jordan with the food game where Joe Montana in the chicken soup game down at the Cotton Bowl, I think a few years before that. But these players that come in and have a great game when they're a little under the weather, that's just tremendous when you hear that. Those are great stories.
Yeah, here's a guy comes in and throws 4 touchdown passes. He had actually lost his starting position early in the season. A guy named Steve Bono, you may have heard of before, who had a nice professional career. But then Neuheisel came back and led them all the way to the Rose Bowl, despite that untidy record that they had during the regular season.
Yeah. Bono was a great quarterback too. He was the replacement quarterback during the strike year for the Steelers. And then he ended up catching on. I think he even started for the Kansas City Chiefs for a few years after that. Mm-hmm. He stayed in the NFL. So so that's great stuff. And that was UCLA. I think that was the first time that they repeated as Rose Bowl champions, because they won the year before. They beat Michigan in a fairly close game, 24-14. And Don Rogers was one of the most outstanding players of that game the year before. So, when you talked about him wanting a little bit of vengeance from them talking about California players. He was big in the Rose Bowl. So.
I think the UCLA won the following year too. I think they made it 3 in a row, if I'm not mistaken.
No, there was a year in between. Southern Cal.
Oh, year in between. Okay,
they won in '86. They beat Iowa.
Ah, that's right. Okay, yeah.
So, but hey, that's great stuff. A great Rose Bowl, and we really appreciate you coming and sharing that with us. Now, you have a book that came out recently, and I don't know if you want to tell people what the title of that is, and let the listeners know where they can get a copy of it.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much, Darren. Yeah, the book is called Bears versus Cardinals, the NFL's oldest rivalry. And again, what we try and do is not go by every game or every season, but to find the stories that make up this great rivalry. People may not know that the Arizona Cardinals were originally from Chicago, and they played their first game in 1920 against the Decatur Staleys, who would become the Chicago Bears. So lots of fun stuff in there, from the Al Capone gang interrupting a ball game to some of the little secret things George Halas did to save some money. and why the Cardinals finally decided to leave Chicago. So thank you for the opportunity to share that information. The book is out now, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, Target, pretty much anywhere online that you would like to look. So thanks, Darren.
Yeah, sure. Tremendous. And folks, if you don't have a pencil or pen, or you're driving, we don't want you to get in an accident. We'll have it in the show notes of this podcast, or on pigskindispatch.com. You can find links to get to Joe's book and get a copy of it. So, Joe, thanks a lot for sharing with this Rose Bowl, and we'll be talking to you again real soon about some other great games of the Rose Bowl. So, thanks.
Thank you, and we certainly look forward to seeing you again, Darren. Thanks again for having me.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff, for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.